We're reading today from the Srimad Bhagavad Sri Caitanya-caritāmṛta, Ādi-līlā, chapter 3, entitled The External Reasons for Lord Chaitanya's Appearance. That's the title. And we are taking a look at text number 41. There's no purport here. So I'll just chant the verses until we get to 43, and then we can read the chant the verse. Taptahima samikanti prakanda sharira navameka jinikanta dvani gambira. The luster of his expansive body resembles molten gold. The deep sound of his voice conquers the thundering of newly assembled clouds. Dhairya vistarene apanarahata charihasta vayam mahapurusha vigyata. One who measures 4 cubits in height and in breadth by his own hand is celebrated as a great personality. Okay. Are you ready? Nyagrodha parimandala hayatairanama. Nyagrodha parimandala hayatairanama. Nyagrodha parimandala tanu chaitanya gunadhama. Nyagrodha parimandala tanu chaitanya gunadhama. Please repeat.
Nyagrodha parimandala hoy
Parimandala hoy thairanam.
Nyagrodha parimandala Nyagrodha parimandala hoy Nyagrodha parimandala hoy Nyagrodha parimandala Nyagrodha parimandala tanu chaitanya Nyagrodha parimandala Nyagrodha parimandala Nyagrodha parimandala tanu
Ladies.
Nyagrodha parimandala Nyagrodha parimandala
Nyagrodha parimandala. Nyagrodha parimandala. Haya is Sangra of him. Nama, the name. Nyagrodha parimandala. Nyagrodha parimandala. Tanu, having such a body. Caitanya, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Gunadhama, the abode of good qualities. Translation. Such a person is called Nyagrodha Parimandala. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who personifies all good qualities, has the body of a Nyagrodha Parimandala. No one other than the Supreme Lord himself, who has engaged to condition souls by his own illusory energy, can possess these bodily features. These features certainly indicate the incarnation of Vishnu, no one else. Jnanatimidandasya Gyananjanashakaya Chakshurummritam yena tasmai Shri Gurave namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam yena bhutale swayam rupa gadamayam dadati vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyaivacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, considering that that's a very short purport, actually, I'm going to read a few verses on, so we can keep moving. And there's a good purport coming up, and I'm going to steal. So, let's go to the next verse here, X44. I'll just read the English. His arms are long enough to reach his knees. His eyes are just like lotus flowers. His nose is like a sesame flower, and his face is as beautiful as the moon. He is peaceful, self-controlled, and fully devoted to the transcendental service of Lord Sri Krishna. He is affectionate toward his devotees. He is gentle, and he is equally disposed towards all living beings. He is decorated with sandalwood bangles and armlets and anointed with the pulp of sandalwood. He especially wears these decorations to dance in Sri Krishna Sankirtan. Recording all these qualities of Lord Chaitanya, the sage Vaishampayana included his name in the Vishnu Sahasranam. The pastimes of Lord Chaitanya have two divisions, the early pastimes and later pastimes. He has 4 names in each of these 2 Leelas. And then the next verse, I want to look at, is a verse from the Mahabharata. So the Vishnu Sahasranam is a section that actually occurs in the Mahabharata. So you sometimes hear about the Vishnu Sahasranama Stotra, but it actually comes, it's a section of the Mahabharata, in which we see Lord Chaitanya specifically referenced, which is quite amazing, seeing that Mahabharata is very old. But actually, we just chant this together, and then we can read the purport, because that's the main central verse. Varna Varno Hemango Varangas Chandanangadi Sanyasa Krichamashanto Nishta Shanti Parayana. In his early pastimes, he appears as a householder with a golden complexion. His limbs are beautiful, and his body, smeared with the pulp of sandalwood, seems like molten gold. In his later pastimes, he accepts the sannyas order, and he is equipoised and peaceful. He is the highest abode of peace and devotion, for he silences impersonalist non-devotees. Purport. This is a verse from the Mahabharata, the Dhana Dharma, and the Vishnu Sahasranama Stotra. In his commentary on the Vishnu Sahasranama, called the Namartha Sudhabhida, Srila Baladeva Vidyabhusha, commenting upon this verse, asserts that Lord Chaitanya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead according to the evidence of the Upanishads. He explains that Suvarna Varna means a golden complexion. He also quotes the Vedic injunction, Yada Pashya Pashyate Rukma Varnam Kartaramisham Purusham Brahma Yonim. Rukma Varnam Kartaramisham refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead as having a complexion the color of molten gold. Purusham means the Supreme Lord, and Brahma Yonim indicates that he is also the Supreme Brahman. This evidence too proves that Lord Chaitanya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. Another meaning of the description of the Lord as having a golden hue is that Lord Chaitanya's personality is as fascinating as gold is attractive. Srila Baladeva Vidyabhusha has explained that the word Varanga means exquisitely beautiful. Lord Chaitanya accepted sannyas, living aside his householder life to preach his mission. He has equanimity in different senses. First, he describes the confidential truth of the personality of Godhead, and second, he satisfies everyone by knowledge and attachment to Krishna. He is peaceful because he renounces all topics not related to the service of Krishna. Srila Baladeva Vibhushana has explained that the word Nishtha indicates his being rigidly fixed in chanting the holy name of Shri Krishna. Lord Chaitanya subdued all disturbing opponents of devotional service, especially the monists, who are actually averse to the personal feature of the Supreme Lord. And there was a few in the next coming up section. It's going to be quotes various verses that have this that refer to Lord Chaitanya, which is quite interesting. Because again, that is our system is that our whole philosophy or our whole theology and our whole practice, it all hinges on the principle of God appearing within this world of the avatars. If there is no avatar and there is no Krishna Katha, because then we cannot speak about anything, because it's because the Lord enters into this world. Now he enters into this world ultimately to perform pastimes, so that then the devotees can have something to speak about that is not mundane. And something quite amazing. Just like we see that is the nature of the living being, is that we want to watch, whether it's movies or whatever it is, but we have to do something. We have to watch something or hear about something other than our own lives. That's the irony. Even though we're so attached to our own lives and we have all these big plans, but at the end, we are interested in other people's lives. It's so fascinating. People work so hard to sustain their life, and then what they do in their spare time is they get absorbed in other people's lives. Whether it's fake lives, like fiction, or whether it's looking at celebrities or whatever. But that is what we're designed to do, actually. Designed to go beyond just our own life and our own day-to-day activities and to become absorbed in something else. So that's why Krishna comes into this world, performs these pastimes, and to specifically give the devotees something to think about. Like a huge, Prabhupada would call it like a road show. Krishna travels from one universe to another with all these devotees who he takes with him, a whole huge troupe of actors. And then he goes from one universe to another, he comes in and he performs all these pastimes, and he makes sure that there's devotees there who see it and record it and write it down, so that now for thousands of years later, we can come together and we can discuss the pastimes of the Lord. And that's what saves us and protects us from becoming absorbed in so much other nonsense that's happening in the world around us. And that is what human life really is all about. And we can see it. You see that the biggest companies in the world, millions and millions of dollars they make from just making all these fake fiction stories. Robert speaks so much. This is one letter, Robert saying how the temples are going down. No one is going to the temples, and everybody is going to the cinema. Because, that's the cinema has taken over the temple. And he said, and there's nothing. The only thing we can do is we have to now create something that is equally as attractive. And that's really what the world is now. It's a war for people's attention. What's happening now. And the devotees, we are very much part of that war. Just like you have, Netflix and Hulu and HBO, they are all competing to make things that are attractive enough so that people will pay their $20 subscription every month. So that they're willing to pay for that, looking for something to get people's attention. The devotees, similarly, when we take up the mission of Lord Chaitanya, that was his mission. His mission was to somehow attract the living beings to freely and voluntarily direct their attention to hearing about Krishna. Considering you can hear about so many different things, but to voluntarily come and say, hey, let me give some of my attention to hearing about Krishna. Because it really is that simple, but the problem is that there's so much competition. So it makes Kali Yuga such an interesting situation. It is so simple, it is so easy. It's a simple process. You chant Hare Krishna and you hear about Krishna. But the problem is that there's so much alternative things, so much other things you could be getting into. And before, if you go back to more traditional societies, people were protected by society. And now we look at it and we criticize and we say, oh, there was so much censorship and there was so much this and so much that. Like in South Africa, like pornography is completely illegal until like the 90s, 1994. It's just not, it's not that it wasn't there, but it was completely illegal. If you get caught, you can get in a lot of trouble, you can't produce it there, it's not on the TV, it's completely illegal. So people would still watch it, but at least the government helped a little bit, making it a little bit more inaccessible, so that it's not 100% based on your own willpower. There is some protection. The Prabhu says him with alcohol, all these things, like at a certain point, there is society at least helped a little bit, push things back, keep things a little bit focused, try in some ways to censor certain things and at least protect people a little bit from what's happening. But now the government offers no protection. The only thing that is protecting you now from so many things that you can get caught up that can ruin your life is purely your own willpower, which is an extremely frightening thought. If you think about how flimsy your willpower is. Like just now on your phone, you can literally, you can do anything on there. You want to gamble, you know how big this online gambling things are? You know how easy it is to download an app? You can just literally in 2 hours or in 20 minutes, you can throw $1 million down the drain like that, and they're ready for you. They're ready, and no one can protect you. It's just basically you and with your cell phone, and then you can get into so much trouble. So that is the issue with Kali Yuga. It is just so much distraction and so little protection offered to the living entities, and so much bad education. We also know people are now educated, and their intelligence is not properly strengthened to be able to differentiate between what is good and what is bad, what is ultimately beneficial and what is not. It's extremely confusing, and specifically for children, because we know that the problem with, there's a lot of things that we as adults can handle, because you go through life and if you're lucky enough, you learn certain lessons and your personality becomes formed and your values become more formed. You make certain decisions about what you want to do with your life, and you also learn so many different things. So now we can go out in the world and we're more protected. You're an adult, you have some strength of intelligence, but it is very unfortunate because children do not have that. Children are extremely influential. They can be so easily influenced because their intellect is just not properly formed. So they just don't have the capacity to discriminate between what is good and what is bad. They cannot understand the long-term consequences of their decisions. And you see that some laws are still there. For example, it's illegal for a child under 18 to get a tattoo, because the idea is that a tattoo is a permanent thing, and you have to be a little at a certain point to really understand that, hey, if you get a tattoo of Mickey Mouse on your cheek, then it might not be so good. Maybe at some point you will regret that. So therefore, at least wait until you're 18. But with so many other things now, that it's not there. So it's a great misfortune in the world now that young people who don't have a properly developed intellect, they're not properly educated to protect it, and causes so much ruin. And all of us, to a certain extent, especially those of us who have not grown up in the culture of Krishna consciousness, if you all look back at your life, so many things we've done that, gosh, if I could go back and do it a little different. Even if it's just going back and not playing so much video games or whatever, so many things that we do that waste so much time and energy. What to speak about outright sinful things. So, but that is the mission then of Lord Chaitanya, is to actually attract people, because it's the age of freedom. Kali Yuga is a license for conditioned living entities to live out their fantasies and their desires that in previous ages were completely impossible. You couldn't do stuff like that. Just practically it was not possible. The society was in such a way that you couldn't do these things. Kali Yuga is like, okay, like all these things that were hidden in people's consciousness, so many yugas. It's like, okay, Kali Yuga is like, it all can come out, okay, just go for it and see what goes, see what happens. So in this age, Lord Chaitanya comes and he also put his stake in the claim. He says, well, let us also do it. By his own pastimes, he then creates these pastimes that are just very captivating to the mind and to the heart. And for those who are lucky enough to get exposed to it, it actually is the only protection that can be offered in Kali Yuga. There's no other protection that can be there, because our willpower is limited, and your willpower will get worn down. In the Manu Samhita, it's explained that every conditioned soul, if you're a conditioned soul, it means you have a natural attraction for illicit sex, eating meat, gambling, and intoxication. It means it's like being a conditioned soul means that these things, you have a natural taste for them. because that's what the material world offers. So the natural desire is there, and if you do not get something better, then inevitably you will find your way in that area. And that's what makes Lord Chaitanya's movement so powerful, is that he is willing to give a taste and an experience of transcendental life, even if one is not necessarily qualified for it. He can give you that, he gives a little taste of it. So, but then we see in this verse a few interesting things. So, if you go back, we see this amazing description of Lord Chaitanya. Is what was he called? Do you remember? Anyagrodha parimandala. Anyagrodha parimandala is this term that refers to the unique features of his body. Say that, you know, his arms extended down to his knees, and there's all kinds of interesting symmetrical features and how he looked. And we see that it is, if we read the CC practically, you see how his appearance must have been something just extraordinary. You hear about how Lord Chaitanya would travel. When he would just travel, he would just walk. He just wanted to walk to Vrindavan. And when he would walk past these villages and people see him, people would literally become so mesmerized, purely just based on his appearance. They had no idea who he is or what he's doing or what his story is. Just by his appearance, people would just leave everything. They would just follow him. And he would just have thousands of people following him. And explained how when he was staying at the house, I can't remember the house of someone close to, when he was visiting Rupa and Sanatan, then so many people would come and they just ruined the persons. They would like break down the walls and they would ruin the gardens. And when he would be walking on the road, people would go so crazy. They would want to have some of the dust that he stepped on. So when he would walk on the road, the whole road would get ruined because people would be digging so much sand out. There were all these holes that they would make in the road. So it just like ruin the whole highway, you know, as he stepped. You see if Lord Chaitanya comes through, you just see all these ruined houses and you just see all these potholes and people and just these crowds of people that just follow him. And when he would cross over, he took a boat to cross over the river at some point. And then so many people got on the ferries because they had, you know, with these big rivers, they would have boatmen that would take people from one side to another, like a ferry. And the people got so crazy that they jumped. So many people got on the boats. All the boats started sinking because the boatmen couldn't keep the people off. And it was all purely based just on Lord Chaitanya's appearance, just on his beauty. So that was his weapon, is that he conquers by his beauty. He would just conquer people's minds and hearts. And so explaining the symptoms of his body, and what to speak then of when he started to chant. And just by chanting in his presence, one can experience that great love. It also gets excited within the hearts of the living entities. So that is amazing, because that is what we need to be protected. In an age in which you can do anything and everything, we need something very powerful to grab your attention. And that is what we have to always understand, that we do a lot of things in our spiritual life, and we try hard to do many things, and with many rules that we follow, and there's all these practices that all come together to help us stay on track. But at the end, it is the higher taste that will ultimately save us. And in the absence of that, nothing else will sustain you. Not your willpower, not this, not that. It is the taste, the happiness that is generated in the association of devotees is ultimately the thing that will protect us the most. Prabhupada explains in the introduction to the Vaishnava songbook that he says that, you know, sitting in the kirtan, being in Hare Krishna kirtan, in the association of devotees, it says it's the only safe place in the material world. There's no other place that is safe. It's only in the sangha of the devotees, because there you are protected by the enthusiasm and the taste of the devotees. So we see some of these verses explain how Lord Chaitanya is in this from the Vishnu Sahasranam. Few things we see that that has some explanation on his bodily features. The fact that he would take sannyas, famous as the incarnation of Krishna that embodies the perfection of renunciation. That is his mood, showing that path. Ironically enough, in the age in which sannyas is basically the most difficult, then Lord Chaitanya shows that path of genuine renunciation, sannyasa krit. But then he also, it's explained here, that he is peaceful because he silences the impersonalist non-devotees. And that's also such a huge feature of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the CC, or Chaitanya's pastimes, is this element of the monists. Because it's interesting to say, sometimes if we speak to people who are into impersonalism, which is naturally very common in the modern world, it seems like we have so much in common. It seems like there's such a big difference. Sometimes, at least if one is able to acknowledge the spiritual reality, that it's such a big step, so much better than just being an atheist. Isn't it such a big step? And we see that Caitanya also told Prabhupada that. Prabhupada was, again, speaking so strongly against impersonalism. Then Caitanya said, well, Prabhupada, I mean, you are harping so much on impersonalism, but isn't the real problem atheism? Isn't that worse? Like, shouldn't we be focusing our fight on atheism? And at least, at least the impersonalists believe in some kind of God. And Prabhupada looked at him, Prabhupada said, you say that because you are an impersonalist. Interesting. So Prabhupada wasn't willing to let that one go. He says, no. And again, if you read the CC, so much emphasis is placed on the dangers of impersonalism. And one has to understand, it is extremely dangerous theology. And Prabhupada says, because ultimately what impersonalism does, if one has this conception that God is ultimately impersonal, what happens is that one loses the ability to become absorbed and to appreciate and to experience the positive bliss of Krishna's actual qualities and pastimes and activities. Because one sees these things as also ultimately mundane. And that's the reality. The Shankaracharya's theology explains that the avatars of God are just Brahman, the impersonal Brahman, that appears within the mode of goodness in this material world. So it's very pure, but it's still mundane, not ultimately eternal. And that little difference makes a big difference, because we say that, no, this is eternal. And the Lord comes in this world. It is not from this world. It is not ordinary. It's not just pure material activity. It's not just something that's good. It is transcendental. Transcendental action, transcendental qualities, transcendental activities. And that absorbing ourselves in these things, it's beyond just a mundane pious activity. It is something that awakens the natural spiritual devotion that is dormant in the heart. So impersonalism, Prabhupada says, have indirectly was the cause of so much sinful activity and material interest, because it blocks people from experiencing the positive higher taste of Krishna Katha. And then if you think that spiritual reality is ultimately void and empty, it's just there's nothing there. You say, yes, there is some kind of eternal dimension, some eternal realm, but there's nothing positive. There's no relationship, there's no qualities, there's just eternal existence. What will happen is that for most people, if you have that conception, then where will you get your juice? Then you will ultimately push you back into material life to find some happiness in the material world. And that's what we see with most people who are professed impersonalists, who profess some spiritual belief, but they think that ultimately everything is impersonal. You will see in their life that their life will be filled with some mundane things, that's where they actually get their sense gratification from. That's where they get their happiness from. And that, again, Prabhupada says, provides such an indirect impetus towards just mundane life, because it blocks one from understanding, no, there's spiritual relationships with the devotees. There's the spiritual activities of Krishna. It's possible to absorb ourselves in something that is qualified, but not mundane. And that's why such a big emphasis is placed on, in the CC, on the dangers, and in Lord Chaitanya's life also, how many times we've set that example of the dangers of exposing ourselves to impersonalist philosophy. And if you look at the history of human life, you understand, impersonalism, depersonalizing other people is the prerequisite for some of the most evil things that have happened in the world. If you look at whenever living beings commit violence, especially on a large scale, there is some philosophy or theology behind it. See, for example, in the Catholic Church, their official stance on animals is that animals do not have a soul. The animal soul is not an eternal soul. There is some life, something that animates animals, but it's not a real soul. It's not, only a human has a real soul. So therefore, animals aren't really eternally existing living entities. They're just like objects of this world, but they are animated and they have some life, but they don't have a soul. And therefore, bon appetit. So therefore, it's fine to eat them. And that same theology goes very far. If we look at, if you look at genocides that have happened in the past, they all, whether it's the Nazis in Germany, whether it is Soviet genocide, whether it's the genocide in Africa. Genocide is actually quite common. It's not such a exclusive phenomenon. It actually happens quite regularly, where one group tries to totally exterminate another group. And at the root of any genocide is some explanation for why the group that needs to be eliminated is not actually human. They're not really human. Therefore, it is fine to kill them. And it is amazing how one has to, that depersonalization that has to happen, where you have to see, no, this is not a real person. So that's how you can close yourself off from thinking about the consequences and the pain that is being inflicted on them, how it's not somehow not real. And we have that ability within us. And it's actually very scary. And impersonalism is just that same tendency that is then projected onto God. He's not really a person. He doesn't really have feelings, doesn't have an experience. It's not really real. So how can we then be moved? If we cannot accept the real personal nature of God, and understanding that God is also a person with an experience, that God has His pleasure and His displeasure, and that is at the root of any relationship, is to understand that the person, starting with the personhood of the other individual, and really take that very seriously. And we see same with our devotee relationships. We have to really have some care and concern for the devotees. Otherwise, there's no juice. Otherwise, there can be no service. If one doesn't really fully understand that this is also a person who also has happiness and distress, it is the root cause of compassion also for other living entities. So depersonalizing is very dangerous, and we do it actually very easily. Not always in very extreme ways. It's very extreme to come to a point to think you can kill another person and not have that's nothing wrong with that. So most of us do not go that far. But we do it to certain extents, where we are able to basically close off and say, and we basically come to the point where we just say that, well, I don't actually care. I don't care about this person. I don't care about whether they're happy or not. I don't care about how I make them feel, what I do. We do the same with Krishna also. So, very dangerous thing that is within us, and something that really has to be overcome. And we see that that's is much the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, is in radical personalism, both in accepting God, the personality of God very seriously, and then also we see in accepting the personalities of the devotees very seriously, because much of the CC is just the interactions between devotees with one another. And it's not always like nice and sweet and blissful, it's also very intense. You see that during the Ratha Yatra, when they were making these rings around Lord Chaitanya. So there was Lord Chaitanya in the middle, he was dancing, but then there was his devotees around him, and then there was also the king, Maharaj Prataparudra, and his men. They were also surrounding, they were the outer circle, keeping people at bay. So they were dancing and they were pushing, and at some point there was, I think it was the superintendent of the temple, or there was some person who was also close to the king. He was the head of his guard or whatever, some person, some important government person who was also there with the king. And somehow he was repeatedly pushing against, what was his name, Shivananda Sain. He was pushing him he was bumping into him the whole time and pushing him. And then at some point, Shivananda Sain turned around and slapped him. Wow. And then this person who was a Kshatriya, he got very upset. And then the king stopped him. The king says, no, you are very lucky. You have been slapped by Shivananda Sain. You should count yourself very fortunate. So we see that even there in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, there's intensity, there's some anger, there's something, there's some forgiveness. So it's not that in the relationships with devotees, it's all just, calm or one could say like devoid of the natural relationships that we have with people, which can be very intense. There's a lot of intensity in these relationships. But impersonalism, that's the real danger. When we start thinking that, when we become numb to the other person, that is something very different. So intensity must be there. The challenges that comes up with devotees as we all try to serve the Lord together, but to always have that, to always keep in mind the reality of the personalities of the devotees and the reality of the personality of Krishna himself is at the core of our theology and the core of understanding the CC, because ultimately it is the happiness that comes in the relationship with the devotees, the happiness that comes in the relationship with Krishna, that moves the heart. And when the heart is moved and invested, then we are protected. Then the heart is full. Prabhupada says in the Bhagavad Gita that we fall down, the impersonalist falls down due to a vacant heart, because the heart is empty. The heart is not being moved by anything. The heart is not invested. The heart does not care. There's no care, there's no concern, not invested in anything. And then an empty heart is very dangerous, because then one becomes ultimately prone to falling down again into material consciousness. So very wonderful. We'll see in the next few verses, we'll see some more verses from the Bhagavatam, from the Puranas, where the divinity of Lord Chaitanya is being explained. And it's very good, because the stronger our faith is in Lord Chaitanya, the stronger our experience will be of getting absorbed in his pastimes, which is ultimately really what helps us. And keeping in mind that it is Lord Chaitanya is how we enter into the Bhagavatam, the whole world, the whole access point into the world of Krishna is through the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. You see the beginning of the Bhagavatam, the whole introduction to Prabhupada's Bhagavatam is what? What does Prabhupada do in the introduction? Prabhupada's introduction to the Bhagavatam is just a synopsis of the life of Lord Chaitanya. Very interesting, seeing that that is how we enter in, even to the world of the Bhagavatam, to the world of Krishna. So very essential for all of us to make that connection with the Caitanya-caritāmṛta. So let us hear if there are any questions or any comments or anything that has been said today. Narada Muni Prabhu.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you can
Okay.
go.
I'm thinking about this this concept of radical personalism, and we see sometimes in relationships, you have a relationship with someone that might be built on a false platform, and when that relationship is built on a false platform, and then that platform collapses due to truth, you could say. How is it that you can continue to progress in that relationship? Because it's like the natural tendency is to like shun and to like, I think about that Cure of Souls series where it's talking about how the worst thing for a spiritualist is isolation.
Yeah.
But it's like at the same time, as an individual soul, you have to lick your own wounds and do certain things. So I'm wondering if you can help me understand, like, when you have a relationship that might be built on a false foundation and that foundation collapses, how does one properly reinstate or personal connection, or at least a personal appreciation for the other party?
Well, you speak about relationship built on a false platform. So the solution is naturally just to have a relationship built on a real platform. And we know that what is the real basis of all our relationships with other living entities is the fact that all of us are part and parcel of Krishna. And that's what Prabhupada's point also was. But it says that, interesting enough, it says, two souls cannot, it's difficult for us to connect together because our ultimate connection is not just with us on this mundane platform. Our bodies are connected. Oh, you're a man, I'm a man, so therefore we're good friends. We can drink beer together and we can watch football because we're both men, or whatever it is. No, the real basis of relationships is the fact that we are both eternally connected to Krishna. And therefore, because you are part and parcel of Krishna, therefore you are worthy of my respect and my concern. Because if I'm interested in my relationship with Krishna, how I treat you will influence my relationship with Krishna. And that's the basic platform. We see that's why the dangers of forming offenses against the devotees. What's the danger? The problem is that if we disrespect the devotees, it will impact your relationship with Krishna. So Krishna is the real foundation of our relationship with everyone. So if you always come back to that platform, at least it will protect us from whatever else there may be, and that is as real as a solid platform as you can get. So if we at least can sometimes even offer people that basic courtesy, and we see even Bhagavatam says that there's different categories of people. There's the Supreme Lord whom we worship. Then there's the devotees who we serve, friendships with. There's people, the innocent people who we are merciful to. And then there's the envious. And the envious, it's not that we hate them or we kill them and we destroy them. We just avoid them respectfully. We say, oh, this living entity, he is also part and parcel of Krishna, but he is very covered at the moment. So for now, we will just keep a distance, respectful distance. So, but in all those relationships, it is Krishna's, we always recognize that Krishna is there. That is then the safest platform on which to build relationships, because that will protect us and allow us, as we say, just a basic level of respect, the baseline. So for some people we have very close relationships with, we have extreme love and affection based on mutual service and knowing one another, whatever. But so it's not that you can have that same strength of relationship with everyone. Naturally, some relationships with other people will be better. But the baseline, the minimum, is deep respect. So that's the minimum platform. With no person you can go beneath that, and that's what Lord Chaitanya says. That you have to be willing to offer respect to all others. Otherwise, you will not be able. You cannot get access to chanting the holy name. So that's just the baseline. So the minimum is just respect. So it's not artificial. It's not that with everyone, oh, we're going to be all love and we all love and just whatever that means for people. But just starting with that baseline of respect, just deeply respecting all living entities, respecting their freedom, respecting their relationship with Krishna, that they also want to be happy just like you want to be happy. That is the safe place to start, and that really helps us. Ādi-līlā, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. You were mentioning about kind of impersonalism and voidism, and I met someone yesterday that I wanted to get your thoughts on. He was into sensory deprivation. Like he would go into there's like a thing in Long Island. It's getting quite big.
Yeah.
They go into like a big bathtub, like a pool, and they put salt in that, and then you float for 90 minutes, and you're just floating. And then he also did something like he went into a cave or something, and he blindfolded himself for like days, and then food was brought to him, and he just eat it, no noise, no sight. I feel like, but he seems to be like getting like to kind of like play devil's advocate. He seems to be getting some sort of taste from just doing nothing. So is it kind of like someone's from negative sees zero as kind of like very good, but then once you get to positive, but I also know that some people in the positive don't see very like devotees say Bhoktaryam Yagita Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Suridam Sarvadudam Yatamam Shantim Richiti. But a lot of devotees' lives are quite intense and they actually like some peace in their lives. So how do we kind of balance this kind of thing?
Yeah, well, the sensitive deprivation thing, there's naturally a big release. To go from suffering to nothing is quite it's not bad. And for most people, it's a huge jump. And these things, they are powerful. And specifically in the modern world, also because people are completely overstimulated and actually exhausted. Most people are deeply exhausted. And we actually, oftentimes, we don't really run on rest, we just run on adrenaline. And you can see it sometimes. This lady, I know someone who ran a retreat center. And she said that so they ran a retreat center somewhere like in a very nice place in South Africa. And they would do these retreats. But actually they realized when people would come, after the first day, they would just sleep. Because it's only when they come there after a day, they can actually sort of relax. And then the moment that they relax, they realize how damn exhausted they are. And then they would just sleep, conk over. And so for most people, it's like that. So therefore, these sensory deprivational experiences are very powerful. And we have to also understand that we're not saying that the Brahman, not that they're experiencing the Brahman, but we're not saying it's not real. We're not saying there's a real experience you can get. Like if you make that contact with the impersonal aspect of God, it's a very substantial experience. We're not saying it doesn't exist, but we're saying that it is, in comparison to the positive, it is like the water contained in the hoof print of a calf versus the ocean, meaning that even though it is so great to experience eternality and to experience the absence of suffering, it is immense. But the positive aspect of Krishna consciousness is broader. And ultimately, we do know that for those who go, like for sensory deprivation, just like everything else in this world, it will be an amazing experience in the beginning. And at some point, even that will become boring. Because again, it is just like Prabhu would tell the story about the man who would go to work every day and he would wear shoes that is one size too small. You heard that story? He would wear shoes that is one size too small every day. So a whole day he would be in so much pain and discomfort because the shoes are actually too small and his feet are so tight. But why did he do it? Because then every day when he goes home, when he comes home, he can take off his shoes and then experience so much ecstasy. Finally, he gets some relief and he feels so much happiness. And that was like the best time of his day, the best moment of his day is when he can go home and take off his shoes. So that's the happiness that's similar. So it's a real experience, but it's just the absence of suffering. And it's not like if someone is into it, we have to be like, this is bad. Your sensory deprivation chamber, this is just Maya and, whatever. No, I mean, people have that experience and we don't have to be afraid of it. We know that the positive is there and the positive will ultimately always win people over, but it's not sustainable. So the happiness that comes from relinquishing sense gratification, there's a relief in it, but it will become boring. And boredom will push us again. And in terms of the devotees, yes, becoming a devotee, your life actually does become a little hectic, generally. But Prabhupada did say that the devotee, they are always overwhelmed in the search for the absolute truth. So it seems to be part of the package. You have to be a little overwhelmed because then your life is very full. And even if you read about Vrindavan, all these places, I'm reading the Ramayana now. And if you read the Ramayana, if you read the whole version, like how there's like so many chapters that just deal with when Ram actually leaves to the forest and then what the residents go through. And it's like so intense. It's like just people crying and people ready to give up their life. So it's a little difficult for the conditioned soul to understand that it is so intense, but there's so much bliss. But as we develop some love for Krishna, it starts to make a little more sense. But it's always that danger of not understanding that the intensity of devotional service, because it's connected to Krishna, it's not a mundane thing. So externally it might look similar, but I can tell you that we all know the happiness that's there makes more sense because it's in connection with Krishna and totally absorbs us. So the intensity is important because that intensity is absorbing. And the worst place you can be in the spiritual life, the most dangerous position to be in the material world, is if you are bored. Boredom is very dangerous because boredom is the start. From there, you can go into all kinds of interesting directions. Yeah? And if you look at people in their lives who have done very dumb things, even devotees who have ended up doing things that ruin their lives, which does happen, you will see oftentimes it can be preceded by boredom. And then from boredom, you can get into all kinds of interesting situations. So very dangerous if a Prabhupada set things up in a way that we are never bored. We always have something to do, and even if it's a little intense, it's okay, because it protects us from the alternative. Any other questions or comments before we break for breakfast? We'll stop right here. Grantara Srimad Caitanya-caritāmṛta ki
Jai.
Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Gaur Premanande.
Jai. Jai.
Yes, okay.